Greg, thank you so much for stopping by. I'm stoked to talk to you right now because this is the time to be speaking about AI integrated into businesses. And you have such a career that has intermingled not only with AI, but all things relevant in business, especially with enterprise, that we couldn't have someone better to address some of the concerns they may be facing today. So, Prove AI, from what I understand, is described as one of the industry's first AI governance platforms. So before we jump into that, what are enterprises doing right now that is no longer working? I feel like if we start there, it starts to sort of paint the picture for why Prove AI and specifically your role in it as CTO starts to paint a picture of importance there that really I think will drive the points home. So are you seeing things now that people are still doing, even though things have moved on and changed?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, yeah, thank you for inviting me here. Glad to be here. Um, yeah, I'd say in a word, the or as simplest I can put it, the mistake that enterprises are still making is treating generative AI like traditional software. So like that's the biggest pitfall, and really everything comes from there, right? There's an attempt to say, hey, cool, there's a new building block out there. It's amazing, right? And it is indeed world changing, right? You got to get on board with this, but rather than dive into it and understand what about it is really different and does it require different handling, does it change how we should develop software? Like the tendency is to say, hey, cool, there's another building block. Let's sort of cram it into all of the existing ways that we handle data collection, governance, right? Governance and all of these other things. Like we want to see it and inspect it just like they have with software. And we could go into lots of details, but fundamentally that's the mistake, right? And that's still the mistake people are making, right? It's quick. We want to get time to value. Let's not worry about how this animal is different. And then, let's do that early 80% of the work that's kind of cool and easy. And let's ignore the 20% that's really hard. Let's defer it. Like let's just wait. And that's observability, that's governance, that's debugging, that's troubleshooting. That's what people are putting off because it's hard and it's different. And that's the pitfall, right? And sadly that's gonna come to bite a lot of people. And that's why a lot of generative AI products are not getting to production, right? That's where they're stuck.
And this comes from you who have spent time working with AWS, Zendit, which is huge, APAC, and actually just globally. And you even, if I'm understanding correctly, picked up an additional language in the middle of all that work you did abroad and such. Does that change having that cultural experience of enterprises even globally, right? I remember I had worked at a company and it was global and the culture was different. People acted differently. They made decisions differently as a whole in stand-up meetings. And I imagine the same goes for how they adopt tech stacks and how they view tools. You sort of alluded to that they're thinking it's the same old thing or let's put it off. Do you feel like your experiences have led you here in a way that made sense? Like logically, it's the next step? Or did AI really spur something forward as you watched it grow and develop over the span of your career where, like, I just had to end up here no matter what?
Yeah, yeah. So I guess that there's two aspects to that, right? One is that I started my career in AI a long time ago. So like this notion of AI governance, AI transferability, AI inspection and debugging. These are all problems that I had in the late '90s and early
Wow.
2000s. Like when I yeah, well, a long time ago. And I was really frustrated at the time because you come up with something that actually works, right? So it's not generative. Well, these were generative systems. They were very early generative systems that basically took a knowledge base and applied it to an actual grammar. There was a whole surfacizer, right, that ended up producing text from the grammar. I mean, yeah, incredibly complex pieces of software, and that's how you did generative language back then. Before statistical approaches were even feasible, right? They were not computationally feasible at the time. Um, so I mean, we built models, and it was just way back then. It was just like I don't know if it was really frustrating because getting this stuff sold to other parties or collaboration with other parties was impossible because people would ask the same annoying questions, right? Where did you get the data to train that model? Can I see the data? How are we going to ensure that the stuff that you're using is applicable to my people and my problem? And yeah, it's just one of those things at the time was unanswerable. And having a long career where AI was a part of everything I've done for the last several decades, right? I just find it almost sadly comical that we're still stuck today with those same problems,
Those
right?
are the
Now
same
generative AI
questions.
is there, right? It's still an unsolved problem, which is why I got so excited about, this problem. But it doesn't actually address the whole international, piece of this. I do think that it does help bring additional perspectives here because one of the things I did work on was a bunch of acquisitions, right, and working with other technology teams. I like to think it also helps me look at a problem where you say, how, yeah, hey, there's different ways of developing software all over the place, and they're specific to the domains they're in, they're specific to the cultures they're in, they're specific to the governance and regulatory frameworks. It's always different, and there's no one right way to do things, right? So I like to think that just so much of my career has been lifted into an area of something that I'm unfamiliar with, and right, the first order of business is always to say, why does it work like that, right? Chances are they're doing it that way because it works well, right? Not because it works badly, right? That's counterintuitive, right? And um, it means that like when I see this stuff with generative AI, to me, it was a knee jerk reaction. I'm like, oh, we're doing this again, right? Where we see something new and great, and our impulse is to go form fit it to ways that we're used to working, right? I'm like, that's a huge mistake, right? So I'd say it does, right? It's another trigger point of mine. It's just like, you talk to 100 customers and all of them are like, this is great. We're totally going to innovate. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to manage this the same way we've managed software for the last 20 years. What do you think? And we said, yeah, that's probably a mistake. Don't do that. Yeah. So both of those things absolutely, the fact that I've been in AI and this has been an unsolved problem for decades, has been a big reason for me to come back here. And then second, I see this mistake, right? This mistake that when you go into a foreign culture, a foreign country, or a foreign acquisition, and you ask like, "Oh, I've never seen things work like that before. Why does it work like that?" Like almost always, you get a good answer. It's almost always, "Oh, because that's the most sensible way of doing something." And here we are. Generative AI comes along. Nobody really cares about why it's different and all this. It's just like we gotta fit this into our way of working. That's a mistake. So yeah, that's why I'm so interested in the space.
No, and it makes sense. There's something I think that's particularly peculiar about enterprise and how many hands have to be involved before something can be approved. Which, if you look at it in a world where AI is making things automated, and we start to look at things like the bureaucracy at all levels of enterprise, do you foresee that having an impact in the number of hands that have to approve things? Before we get into the idea of safety and all those things, just coming from what we know to be true about enterprise. You're going to get a proposal out and you're going to work with vendors. A lot has to happen, sometimes months at a time, the amount of speed that it moves at in a world where we have to move quick, quick,
Yeah.
quick.
Right.
How do you see technology like machine learning and in particular transformer technology like LLMs shaping the landscape there as we
Yeah.
speak?
So I hope it simplifies those approvals. It has to, right? It really has to. But I think that yeah, I don't like making these sort of off the cuff predictions, right?
Sure.
Because that's silly. But I have a line of reasoning here, right? That I'm happy to share if you'll listen.
Yeah.
And it's really that when people a lot of this decision making that we have today in enterprises comes down to that each decision it requires sort of a small amount of mental effort and it is best handled by a human, right? So as complicated and bureaucratic as it is, it's typically not completely nonsensical, right? Typically it's maybe not efficient, but it does actually make sense in some way, right? I mean, I think we most of the time we see that type of behavior. The interesting thing that I think we need to realize though is that with generative AI, a lot of the caveats about how it works requires a level of knowledge and understanding that really is going to require people to invest time. Right? You can't read a primer over the weekend about generative AI and then approve anything about it or work with it. It just doesn't work. You have to go all in and invest a lot of time. So I think what you can realistically expect then is, in the past, if there was four people making very small little contributory decisions about whether to do something or not doing something. Just the practical reason about whether or not we want. I mean, we could debate all day about whether or not AI should be in the picture or not. But practically speaking, you're just going to have two of those four people who are unable to contribute anything to the decision making process anymore. And thus, like, we should just lean back on and say they're not, like, enterprises are not nonsensical, right? They optimize for things like cost and output and others. Those people are inevitably going to go away. So thus you do in fact see the individuals who can get into the details making higher value decisions, and just as a must, right? I mean, all of the other scenarios are just, they don't make any sense if you do the thought exercise, right? Because you end up with somebody making a offering an opinion about something that doesn't actually contribute anything. So it's very unlikely to persist. And the the tenant, or the thing that I'll always push on, is that what Gen AI requires is people to get into the details, and that has a whole knock on effect. It's just this this I've seen enterprises try this. Everybody wants to have a hand in generative AI, like they want to be a decision maker, and over again they just realize at some point that, this is not, I'm going to have to invest a year of my time. Like, I can't actually do anything unless I really invest in this. And then they make a decision. Do I need to? Do I need to do that or not? And many people say, I don't need to do this. Let's just make this other person the decision maker. And typically that means the decision making is getting pushed downwards into the organization towards people who are really, really familiar with with the material. And that's a good thing, right? It's a good thing, right? You're not dropping the quality of decisions. Yeah, it's just that that's going to be the trend, which means that there's a gap of people who used to contribute to decisions that are no longer necessarily, going to add value. I mean, they might do something else, right? So there's no big picture here. It's just that that's probably the most practical change that we could see coming out of this.
No, I love that you shared that because, I want the listeners, especially if they're working in any capacity in enterprise, to understand. Like, you heard it straight from a CTO. Like, this is what you need to know. Some
Mhm,
CEOs should really be CMOs and some CMOs should really be CEOs, but a
mhm.
CTO is a very specific set of skills, like Liam Neeson. And there's something you really need to pay attention to, that because you've had your finger on the pulse of this technology for a while. And you're right, as soon as decision making gets pushed down, that brings people up, which is great. You always want your people to move up internally, right? But taking the time to understand the technology will fundamentally, radically change everything if you're willing to make the investment. So let's get into this, right? Prove AI. You talk a lot about observability. Can we sort of unwrap that word a little bit more? Because for some people, that could pertain to being able to see how it's making a decision. But as you and I know, there's this idea of a black box, and we don't really know how technology is doing what it's doing, but we can train it with some weights, right? Which is, how it makes decisions. But I want to know how you define observability.
Yeah, sure, sure. So observability in this case is just to make sure that, like, if me or my team is creating software, right, that I have the information I need to make sure that it is performing, right, at a level that I feel acceptable, right, and me and whoever my stakeholders are, partners or customers. That's all it really is, right?
Okay.
Observability is just that, right? So in some cases, that might mean I need to know how the black box works. In other cases, in most cases, I don't actually need to know how the black box works at all, and that's okay, right? However, I do need to design my system in such a way that I have a counterweight to that I have enough observed data points from other places in the pipeline that I can be dead sure that even if the black box goes off the rails, that I have safeguards in place, that I can observe that, I can react to that, and I can ultimately take action such that, whatever contract I have with my stakeholders or my customers is maintained, right? But I mean, that's all it is, right? So we don't necessarily, again, there's a pitfall here where we say, oh my gosh, let's inspect the AI, right? And that's going to be our observability kind of initiative. And my approach and Prove AI's approach is different. We say it's, oh, I mean, yes, you should in part do that, but really what you should be thinking about is, what does your application need to do? What do your users really need? Like, what is the experience that they need out of this? How could you instrument your overall application to make dead sure that they're getting what they need, right? At the applicable, quality levels, and at the, with protections against things like hallucinations. But it doesn't mean you make a beeline to the model and say, I want to inspect you and manage you and govern you, right? It means that you need to start out and say, all right, this is a complicated software system. Parts of it are now non-deterministic, which is not new. if you work in
So true.
industrial, right, if you work in industrial places or places where all sorts of parts in your pipeline, some of them are in fact non-deterministic, and it's not new for it's not new for the industry as a whole. It's just new for a lot of people who are now suddenly starting to play with something. They've never dealt with the non-deterministic component before. So like that's the problem. But I mean, again, the pitfall is just this sort of obsession with focus on the non-deterministic thing. Whereas I think people who have dealt with things like for industrial systems and things where there's inherent, like, yeah, we don't know what this is. Yeah. Like then maybe there's an industrial process and, it's subject to all sorts of, strange interference and outcomes. And you build software to manage around it. And that's the right approach. And where people are getting hung up is they're not used to doing that. And they're not used to crafting those sort of end-to-end metrics, those outcome metrics, right? And that they say, well, that's too hard. Let's just focus on the easy thing, which is let's talk about governing the black box, right? Which is the yeah, that's the pitfall. That goes back to what I said. You're trying to do the easy 80% and not do the 20% that's hard, and that's the pitfall.
I mean, it never ceases to amaze me how easy it is to fall towards a vanity metric because it's simply the lowest hanging fruit. When in reality, the more you focus on the 20% that's hard, like you're saying, that any 20 rule, that really does drive home a lot, especially for enterprise. So,
Absolutely, yes.
why don't we get into what Prove AI really is doing for people? I mean, and we talk about this idea of being safe, compliant, and trustworthy. How does Prove AI do that for the
Mhm.
people that it works with?
Yeah, so Proof AI is Proof AI does have a legacy towards creating, a governance platform, right? That was focused on full life cycle observability and giving people who are working with AI, a means to observe across their entire pipeline rather than these vanity metrics that you're talking about. Since then we've moved into additional areas, right? We've just released you know, a an initial sort of curated and free observability stack consisting of OpenTelemetry and Prometheus, right? The idea here is that, you know, we hear that one of the problems that customers have is that they understand they should be tackling the hard problems about observability and full life and like they understand, like, they're not like, people are generally well-meaning and they're generally pretty intelligent and capable people. And what we've heard from them is yes, they understand that they shouldn't look at vanity metrics. They understand that they really need to focus on this hard problem of really outcome metrics. And then they say, okay, well, when I ask maybe 100 of them, well, why aren't you doing that? Most of them will say, because it's going to take too much time. I don't have a place to put those things. I simply don't I'm under the gun to deliver my Gen AI solution. I don't have time to figure out how to rethink observability collection. Where should I put the data? Oh, it's much larger than perhaps, data that's collected from traditional software observability. It's different information classification, right? Typically you want to store customer generated questions and answers, right? Otherwise, how are you going to recreate things? That's typically a no-no. That's not something you'd be able to do in a software observability system because it's a no-no to collect those things under most compliance standards. Yeah, so people are just like, oh, I have no good option, and I realize I could do this myself. I just don't have time, right? So Proof AI's first value proposition and the thing we have out there is to say, let's help you with that metric collection. Let's help you get over that hurdle, right? Of saying you're a capable individual, you know what you want to do, you just don't have the time to do it. Let's at least get you a quick start stack of software that helps you start doing telemetry collection for your generative AI systems the way you know you should. And that's what we have today. Now beyond this, of course, we're going to be releasing additional things that run on top of these free open source, telemetry collection tools that will help you get much more deeper into the debugging and the handoff and what should I focus on questions that are another big gap in the market today, right? So if I need to debug a system today, right? And there's tools at my disposal, but many of them are trace focused, right? I get this mile long trace and it's telling me the blow by blow of what happened. And me as a developer, I'm sitting there saying, all right, this doesn't tell me if this is severe or not, right? This doesn't really tell me if this is going to happen again. This doesn't tell me if I should spend time on it. And most importantly, if I spend time on it, I have no idea if this is a 30-minute fix or if this is a 2-week fix. And those are things that this is new because in traditional software, you don't like we've evolved to the point where you know you're you can generally get that from the graphs and from the operational readiness that's already out there. It's just generative AI and these traces, you don't get that. So you end up sitting there and saying, well, it's the start of the day. Let me just start looking at this trace. And 3 hours have passed, and you're like, I've gotten nowhere. This is going to be a 2 week fix. I've blown my entire morning. I've done nothing. I just need to drop it now. And like there's a very clear and distinct need from people here to say, what should I look at? Well, is there anything to look at today? What should I look at? If I'm going to look at it, is this going to be a big deal or a small deal? Do I need to spin up a team to help me with this, or should I do this myself? And then if I'm going to do it myself, where should I look? Because I don't want to spend 3 hours looking through a trace and finding a bunch of red herrings. There's nothing out there in the market that really helps me answer those questions today. And that's where Prove AI, you'll see some releases against that in the next couple of months.
Wow, what I'm picking up is that enterprises, number one, we've talked about this and we established that they're looking at this like traditional software, and that's where they're leaving opportunity, power, money, energy on the table by doing so. Because it would be relatively easy with the right partner, someone like Prove AI and what you're doing, to actually integrate it effectively into the enterprise itself. Because once that's done, sky's the limit.
Yeah,
And now I'm picking up what this conversation is really about, which leads me to ask, if you could be all enterprises CTO's best friend, can you give them the language to explain to the rest of the stakeholders in the executive suite, look, we need this kind of tool, this kind of partner, this vendor, and because XYZ? Can you sort of put that out there?
yeah, yeah, sure, sure. So I'm gonna copy, like, it's the same message that you would get during the cloud revolution and all of these things, right? So I don't actually think you need anything new, right? The main message is, right, if we're going to keep up and we're going to be the best, right, at generative AI, like, because the expectation from shareholders and boards and stakeholders is that we're going to use Gen AI and we're totally going to nail it, right? That's the expectation that people have. So like as a CTO or as a technical leader, right? Yeah, I think that the key message is, the language you have to use there is to say, if we're going to really do that, if we're really going to be the best at Gen AI, let's not kid ourselves. We need to go right after the hardest part of the Gen AI stack, right? And we need to master it, right? There's no sort of kind of glossing around and kind of sticking our toe in the water here. We're going to go towards the hardest part of the problem. It's going to require a change to how we work, just like when we went from on-premise servers to cloud-hosted stuff and continuous deployment, right? It was the same message. If you're serious about being a software company, you're going to have to change the way you work. It's the same thing with generative AI. If you're serious about generative AI transforming your business, you're going to have to change how you work, and you're going to have to actually go after the hardest part of the problem first. And that turns out to be things like debugging, the operationalization piece, right? And I'm not making things up, right? You can see everybody talking about this, that getting to production is the hard problem. And it's a hard problem because people skipped the observability part, they skipped the debugging part, and they skipped all of that stuff. So like the message to everybody is that the proof is on the evidence is on the table, right? People didn't get to production. That's the problem. Why didn't they get production? Because they skipped things. They skipped the hardest things. All right. So sensibly, what do? Right? Do you cheat and sort of, is there a sneaky way to do this? The answer is no. There's never been a sneaky way to do this, right? The answer is go after that hard problem, go master it, go be the best at it. And as a team, that's what we're going to get good at. That's what we're going to be the best at, because that's actually going to be the biggest predictor of what allows us to be best at generative AI. Um, and yes, in the course of doing that, you need tools, just like the cloud revolution, right? I need tools to aid in my continuous, deployment. I need things like, all of the observability tools for those traditional software stacks, right? Log ingestion. I need to start acquiring tools along the way, but they're very much going to be a means to an end, right? We still have to own this problem. We have to be willing to solve it ourselves.
I love it because if you think about it, we alluded to this earlier. You've spent time in AWS, which, as you were addressing, there was the cloud revolution, and everyone had to come face to face with the fact that that's where things were going, right? And this is yet another new frontier, and you again are at the helm of it, leading it. And the message, like you said, is the same. You got to face it. There's no other way around it. there may be some retooling, there may be some hiring, there may be some things you need to do, but that's the hard part is getting exactly what you need to address the problem. It sounds, kind of easy when you hear it, but the fact is that no one is trying to hear it right now,
Yeah.
especially in enterprise.
Absolutely. Well, it's hard because of the focus, right? It's that right. It's going to require a period of time when you're focused on something that your external stakeholders or customers don't really understand what you're doing. Right? And you're like, why are you so in the weeds with this little thing? I want to see an AI that's talking all sorts of stuff, and instead you're talking about metrics and data. That's honestly the hard part because people are under the gun, and there's an expectation that they're going to create something amazing in 2 months, and it's just not realistic, right? And that's the biggest challenge. That's very much just an education problem with the people, right, that you work with. It's not an easy fix to that, but that is the problem because you're going to have to ignore all of those things, right? You're really going to have to go deep and you can't go deep in everything, right? So you're gonna have to put those things aside and say, now this is it. And it's just that there's no immediate value to people. But again, there's precedent here, right? Cloud revolutions, the whole data science revolution, it required a bunch of self-investment. And during that period of time, right, you didn't necessarily see a lot of immediate value to external people. You were redefining how you're going to develop, redefining your tool sets and all this sort of stuff. And whatever worked back then should work now, right? In terms of managing the people you have to interface with.
And that's something I wanted to make sure we address is who are the types of companies and enterprises, particularly because there's many across an enterprise in terms of verticals that Prove AI is looking to work with and help, or who are you currently working with if you can share?
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure. We'll work pretty much with both enterprises as well as smaller businesses. I mean,
Okay.
the stuff that we have released today is open, right? It's something you can go download and play with anyway, right? So feel free to go to proveai.com, take a look at the distribution we've created, download it, play with it, right? It's free open source. We do have a paid or a future paid dashboard. For now, that's free as well that you can use as a fast path to getting some metrics created. But all of this is stuff that you can use out of the box today. We don't focus on a particular vertical right now. And that's on purpose, right? Because what we find is that it seems to be a bit of a red herring. Like we can focus on certain types of AI architectural, patterns, right? So it means like people who have built their generative AI in a specific way. Like there's a way for us to narrow and help those types of individuals. And typically we like to help individuals or we're better suited to helping the underserved individuals who tend to be a little more a little more advanced in the in their use of AI. Meaning, if you have if you're busy creating a chatbot, right, with a few sort of stock answers based on a retrieval data set, yes, absolutely, we would like to help you. I think in full honesty, right, there's already tooling to help you with that type of scenario. They typically come from your hypervisor, whoever you're using. They might come from your foundation model provider, your Anthropics and your OpenAI. We're probably a better suit for the individuals who are running multiple types of models, maybe running some sort of on-prem model, right? But we can narrow our focus not really towards vertical or to enterprise versus small. It's really towards, well, you know, what type of pipeline did you actually set up? And in general, we're better suited for organizations that maybe have multiple models at play, maybe a small scale or large scale agentic system, right? Those are the places where we're going to add the most value initially.
I was just going to ask you right now, there is a huge craze with the idea of agentic tooling, different options out there, some open source, some through frontier model as service add-ons. And it does look like the future is bright. It looks like there's a lot that could be done. There was even the whole thing where they had made their own social network, but that turned out to be a whole other thing. I was wondering if I could get your thoughts on how you view this emerging future of agentic workflows and what a company looks like when you can have agents and humans. I think you alluded to it earlier. We're always going to need humans, even if it's not efficient. It makes sense, which I love, by the way. But maybe you could shed a little more light on how you see agentic workflows blending in to a future in the workplace.
Yeah, yeah. So if right now it appears that um, agentic is something that there's no stopping agentic, right? Agentic architectures will perform better for a lot of problems today. And we've already seen that with customers, right? And again, in some ways, it's fun to think that for the visionary and sort of the mental exercises about how cool that is. But again, as technologists, right, we're also practical people, and just
Right.
the reality of it is that having multiple models, each of which is really good at a small thing, is a far better way to run a complicated system than one giant model that is kind of good at a lot of things, right? So it's just practically speaking, right? If you're trying to build a really interesting generative AI system, right, we know that you're going to get a better result if you have multiple models, each of which you've constrained to do something really well. So like if you take that as something that's already happened, right? That's not really that's not really a prediction. That's stuff that I think is already out there.
Yeah.
Then a logical continuation of it is then, well, if you have a couple of agents that are really good at a certain things and you've figured out how to run them, then path of least resistance is going to be for those agents to better interact, to start interacting right with your either internal stakeholders or your customers because it's already there. Like why if it's already working, why would you go and say develop something something else? Yeah, and again, I'm not overly opinionated on, well, will it need
Right. Right.
human oversight or will it not? I mean, it depends on the use case. It depends on the severity of the of what could happen if you get a bad answer or a wrong answer. It depends on a lot of things. So it's almost like you just want to build with the assumption that sometimes you're going to need oversight, checks and balances. Sometimes you're not. Sometimes it just won't make any sense, right? And there's lessons we can take from, from AI usage in the early 2000s and mid 2000s, right? It's just like if you get served a wrong ad, it's not the end of the world, right? So
Right.
you know, so do we have human in the loop and extensive reviews of ad targeting and tracking? Like no, because it wasn't really worth it. And um, you're going to see the same things with AI, right? It's like, did an agent like give you a refund? Uh-oh, that's bad. That probably,
Yeah.
that's high blast radius, right? If we're talking about other agentic workflows where it's sort of advising you on, I don't know, an internal travel policy or something like that, it's less of an issue. There's a way to mitigate that downstream that means that maybe you shouldn't go overboard on human in the loop and approvals and things like that early on. So I don't know, it's a bit of
Yeah,
a
no, no, I love it because it's true. You probably don't want to put anywhere near payroll, or anywhere where you can start running a credit card or returning purchases to people because people can prompt inject. And there's this whole we haven't even gotten into sort of like cybersecurity aspects of things and how that could because that'd be a whole other conversation I could imagine we could elaborate on forever. But I just wanted to illustrate the point that you leading at Prove AI, you're already looking into these things and it's conversations that you're already having, which means you're ahead of the curve on those things. And that enterprises that are worried about said things, all you have to do is partner with the right company to make sure that that's taken care of. And that's part of the hard part is trying to figure out, well, who do we choose as a vendor to work
yes,
with? Well, you just had this entire conversation where you're listening to somebody who has a complete understanding, even came from the last frontier that was leading things with cloud and brought that same expertise and its evolution and all the experience that was necessary to step into that field here today. So, I mean, for me, that makes it pretty clear where a preferred vendor may be living or residing and that they can choose from. So, with that said, I want to roll out the red carpet for you and let people know where they can connect with you, connect with Prove AI, and all those things.
absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes, I mean, most of the information and the best way to contact us is take a look at proveai.com. Take a look at what we have available in GitHub, and you'll see that there's an easy both email and Discord channels that we would encourage everybody to just strike up a conversation with one of us there. That's by far the easiest thing, and really, if it's we like to work with people who realize they're going to or already need to do better with their telemetry collection. We're happy to help people through that journey. Any amount of help is fine for us, right? It's sort of like, if you want to partner with this and you want advice along the way, we're early enough that we're happy to do that. If you want to do it yourself and you want to own it as you should, right? Hey, that's good too, right? We understand that that's the approach. We're built on open source technology, but we do not we believe it is a major pitfall to put your telemetry into something proprietary right now, right? It's going to be too large, it's going to be too expensive, and the market is too new, right? So it's a big mistake to go say, you know what I need? I need to go buy a big old, AI management software, and then let's pump all of our telemetry in there, find out it doesn't work, and then find out you can't get it out, right? I mean, that's awful, right?
Yeah.
So we say, don't do that, right? And I think most of the technologists I've spoken to agree with.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, you only have to look at the fact that Apple and themselves as a company has made certain choices to partner with certain companies while they focus on developing whatever they can internally. You just look at how much money has already been invested. It'd be a crazy effort to try to do that now in this point with all the models that are out there, and all the open source models are amazing. They're actually they're pretty close. So, that being said, I've just had such a great time speaking with somebody who actually understands what's happening and has both the technical capacity, but also the human empathy to be able to drive the point home that look, yeah, there's going to be some changes for sure, but there's also hope for people to still be involved, and that's something that people are nervous about. I think for no reason, because we're still in a good place. So I just want to thank you for providing both of those qualities in this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This was a great, great discussion, and happy you asked all of the questions you did.
Yeah, no.
These are the things people should. This is the right way to think about the Gen AI problem, right? Rather than getting focused on like what marketing is saying out there and what we're hearing. It's really important to stay focused on what are you trying to do with this? Like, what problems are you going to have? How should you, change the way you think as a technical leader here? So, thank you for that.
Yeah. So, look, Greg, I just want to say thank you so much for stopping by, man. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.